Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show. Happy Thursday, everybody. It was an absolute crap show in Congress this week. Made for some fantastic daytime television, though, if you happen to catch any of it. Almost too much to break down here. It was ridiculous. We could go on for hours, but we're going to start with the star of Real Housewives of D.C. throwing down in a congressional hearing this week. Texas Representative Jasmine Crockett, who is a Democrat, went on a tirade during a discussion on trans rights, i.e. the legal ability of men to invade women's private spaces like bathrooms and locker facilities and shower facilities, and to take over girls' sports and steal their trophies and their scholarships and their championships and all of that. Not that the left actually cares about women, of course, unless they can use them to promote their war on children. Otherwise, women are just collateral damage in the left's incessant desire to protect mentally ill men. But never mind any of that. Here's Crockett spouting off, and let's just say it's not exactly what she said, which would have been ridiculous in and of itself. It was more how she said it. Take a listen.
Somebody's campaign coffers really are struggling right now. So she gonna keep saying trans, trans, trans so that people will feel threatened. And child, listen, I want y'all to tell me whether or
Do
not
call me a child. I am no child.
I want
Don't
to
even
find
start.
out
what the freaking Waffle House was that? What in the world? Okay, here's the deal. I'm just going to say it, okay, because I think this is absolutely ridiculous that as a society, we feel like we cannot call this nonsense out for exactly what it is, because God forbid somebody think we're a bigot or whatever. I don't buy that nonsense. We're all thinking it, and I'm going to say it because it deserves to be said. This is some hood rat nonsense right here. That's exactly what this is. And I know there are plenty of pearl clutchers that, gasp and, you can't say that. That's racist. Yes, you can say it, because no, it's not. No, it's not. Everybody knows exactly what this is. Let's be very clear here. Jasmine Crockett knows exactly what she's doing. She's making a definitive, willful choice to do this. And by the way, this is not something new. This woman is notorious at this point for basically saying, hold my hoops, and then going off on the House floor or some congressional hearing room like she's about to throw down with some other girl over, I don't know, Flava Flav or whatever. You may recall some months ago when the House was holding hearings over Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's potential involvement in his illicit business dealings, Jasmine Crockett lost whatever passes for her mind, and this is the display she put on.
Yeah, but I will tell you what the president has been guilty of. He has unfortunately been guilty of loving his child unconditionally, and that is the only evidence that they have brought forward. And honestly, I hope and pray that my parents love me half as much as he loves his child. Until they find some evidence, we need to get back to the people's work, which means keeping this government open so that people don't go hungry in the streets of the United States. And I will yield.
So this is not new. This is not new. This woman is notorious for this at this point, but nobody wants to say it and call it what it is, because our society, I believe, has adopted this notion and accepted the premise that you're not allowed to call something what it is, even when it is obvious, even when everybody can see it and everybody understands it and everybody's thinking it, because everybody's so terrified of being labeled racist. Even conservatives who know full well they're going to be called a racist no matter what they say anyway, so at this point, who cares? There are certain things that we're not allowed to say and certain behavior that we're not allowed to call out because somebody somewhere is going to get upset about it, and I am sick of that. That is a false premise, and I absolutely reject it, because this is ghetto right here. It is ghetto. Everybody looking at it understands that, and Jasmine Crockett knows it. She knows it. This is a show that she puts on, and she knows exactly what she's doing, and she wants to be able to call anybody who has legitimate criticism about it a racist. Let's get one thing very clear. This has absolutely nothing to do with racism. This is not about the color of someone's skin or where they are from. There are plenty of black legislators, black female legislators, who, whether we align politically or not, regardless of whether or not I have ever agreed with a single vote they may have ever cast during their time in office, I will say, behave professionally and with decorum in the way they act and in the way they speak. They do not behave this way, like they're about to brawl in the parking lot of a Popeyes at 2 a.m. Outside the halls of Congress, in just everyday America, there are plenty of black Americans who carry themselves with professionalism and dignity and respect for who they are and where they are. And I know this because contrary to the racial siloing that the left tries to push so hard, I know plenty of black Americans, good, hardworking, law-abiding people who have no problem getting an ID, by the way, and who are just as appalled and embarrassed at this nonsense as everybody else. There used to be an understanding in this country, in this society, that the way that you spoke to your buddies while watching a football game, or the way that you goofed off with a friend in your living room is not the manner in which you carry yourself in a professional setting. But leftists have gone to war with anything that resembles basic decency and an understanding that people should carry themselves with a little bit of pride and self-respect, and respect for where they are and respect for those around them. And by the way, when I say this has nothing at all to do with race, I can back that up pretty easily. I had the same exact criticism when John Fetterman showed up to the Senate in a hoodie and a pair of gym shorts like he had just rolled out of a bar. I don't care that your constituents are blue-collar steelworkers in Pittsburgh. That's fantastic. But now you're in the halls of Congress to do a very serious, very important job, and you should dress and conduct yourself in a manner that shows that you understand that. Some of this is just common sense. It should go without saying, or at least it used to. A shorts and a sweatshirt are not professional. And I've seen employees at traveling carnivals dressed better than this. And John Fetterman, by the way, is a white dude. I don't care. This display was unbecoming of a person elected to Congress to represent the people of his district in one of the highest offices in our nation, who is charged with passing laws that affect a country of 340 million people, including the most powerful military in the world. This is serious business here. But the left have created this environment where now even among conservatives who reject identity politics, right? And who reject the idea that white people are systemically racist or that black people are automatically the victims of oppression or whatever, we have still subconsciously adopted the notion and accepted that there are certain things that we cannot call out, certain things we cannot say because it is just understood to be racist or whatever, regardless of how legitimate and correct it actually is. I know this because I did an Instagram reel on this exact issue earlier this week, and I see the comments that people leave where they're squirming in their seats like, are we allowed to say that? I mean, I agree in everything, but can we say that? To which my answer is yes. Yes, you can. And you should. Because falling into the "you must be a racist if" trap that the left has laid here is extremely dangerous, because it leaves us in a place where now any legitimate criticism of any person of color or a woman or an immigrant or anybody who falls into one or more of the left's preferred victimhood categories is automatically deemed a racist or a sexist or some sort of a phobic comment. Karen Bass is another prime example of this happening right now in real time. Karen Bass is the mayor of Los Angeles, who has rightly come under legitimate criticism for her level of preparedness, or rather lack thereof, in the face of these wildfires that are currently burning down half of LA, and for her handling of the situation after it started happening. And I will tell you, as somebody who does not reside in LA and who, thank God, does not have to deal with the policies of that dumpster fire of a city, I will tell you, maybe this is exposing the ignorance on my part, but I, for one, had completely forgotten about the fact that she was black. Didn't even register with me. Never really thought or cared when all of this started, because I don't live in LA. In fact, the fact that Karen Bass is black was something that I only remembered after I had already read that she was over in Ghana for their presidential inauguration when these wildfires broke out, which seemed absolutely ridiculous to me. Why in the world does the mayor of Los Angeles need to take a taxpayer-funded trip to Ghana to celebrate their president getting inaugurated? And I guess she was going to meet with their new vice president, who was like the first woman to be elected, which yay for Ghana, I suppose. But I don't see why that's something that the mayor of LA should give two craps about. You've got an entire city to run, one of the biggest, most populated cities in the entire country. You'd think that'd keep you a little bit busy. Of course, it makes a little more sense now when you think about it, given the left's love of identity politics, why Karen Bass would be over in Ghana celebrating a female getting elected vice president when otherwise nobody would ever care. The fact that she was overseas attending another nation's presidential inauguration when an absolute disaster broke out in her own backyard and she wasn't there to deal with it is definitely something worthy of scrutiny and criticism, and would be regardless of her demographics, regardless of who she is. Anybody in that position would have rightly come under criticism for that. Why the heck was she there? Why the heck is she spending taxpayer money to be there? It's funny because Yahoo later published a story citing Bass from earlier during her campaign for mayor back in 2021 when she was making these big promises that she would never take any tax-funded trips overseas if she was elected. She would never waste taxpayer funding on overseas trips. Turns out that was a big fat one because since then, in less than 3 years, she has so far taken 5 taxpayer-funded overseas trips. And this time, turns out she was at a cocktail party at the embassy in Ghana, literally a cocktail party, when the Palisades went up in flames last week. And so she had to rush back to deal with this disaster, which ended up being far worse than it needed to be, in part because of the government's mishandling of the water system. In fact, the fact that the fire department was far more interested in pushing DEI policies and making sure they had enough women firefighters so they didn't look exclusive. Karen Bass is the one who was cutting $18 million from the fire department right before all of this happened. She wasn't making sure that the reservoirs were filled. We find out after the fact there was an entire 117 million gallon reservoir in the Pacific Palisades that was dry as a bone. And nobody has a good reason why. Smack dab in the middle of this neighborhood that was burning down because the fire hydrants were running empty. This whole thing was just a display of gross ineptitude on the part of state and local government officials, Karen Bass being chief among them. Has nothing to do with the fact that she's black or a woman. Has to do with the fact that Malibu is burning to the ground and there was no water, and you've got a high-ranking official in the fire department who's on video saying that, if a man, needs to be rescued from a fire, that's not her problem, and he shouldn't have gotten himself in that position in the first place. So if she's not strong enough to carry him out of a burning building, he's only got himself to blame. These are all major issues that are obviously worthy of criticism. I could give 2 craps if the mayor of LA is a black woman or a white man or a he/she with purple polka dots. I don't care. Gavin Newsom is a white male who has also been heavily criticized over this mismanagement that made this disaster even worse than it needed to be. You've got illegal aliens on the sidewalk being apprehended by local residents because he was standing there with a blowtorch trying to light another fire, and then the cops show up and arrest him. Turns out he's already been arrested at least once in Los Angeles, but he was released because this city is a sanctuary city that doesn't cooperate with federal immigration authorities and doesn't turn criminal aliens over for deportation, because they're more interested in protecting illegal alien criminals than they are protecting their own people. So this guy's back out on the street. Now he's trying to light a fire with a blowtorch in the middle of a city that's, halfway burned to the ground. And the LA police decide they don't have enough probable cause to hold him on suspicion of arson because apparently standing there trying to light a fire with a blowtorch doesn't count, so they just get him on probation violations instead. It does not take a rocket scientist to figure some of this stuff out. You don't have to be some elite overpaid bureaucrat to get this. And it is worthy of criticism by ordinary people who are being affected by this insanity. But see, if you say any of that, if you have legitimate concerns about the policies that are leading to these problems, if you have anything to say about California's mismanagement of the environment in the name of climate hysteria that has left their forests dry as a bone, or, fire hydrants empty, and the reservoirs are basically just giant skate parks, you must be a racist bigot because the mayor of LA happens to be a black woman. No. I absolutely reject that. If you act like an idiot or you do idiotic things, you don't get to be shocked and angry and claim oppression when you get called an idiot. Just like you don't get to act like an unprofessional wannabe gangsta sitting at your seat in the United States Congress without getting called out for acting unprofessional. You know what you're doing. If you enact stupid environmental policies that get people killed, DEI policies that get people killed, you leave fire hydrants and reservoirs dry, you cut the fire department's budget and it gets people killed, you should absolutely be called out and held accountable for that. Black woman, white male, or otherwise. You do not get to hide behind ridiculous, shallow claims of racism to avoid legitimate criticism for your unprofessional behavior or your stupid policies. And I'm sick of being told we can't say that or we have to somehow sugarcoat it in a way that keeps from stepping on anybody's toes. These are elected officials who answer to the people. Criticism of how you conduct yourself or the things that you do while in office is fair game. Of course, contrived outrage was the flavor of the week in Congress. We saw no shortage of it. Jasmine Crockett spouting off like somebody who had, just gotten her order wrong at the Waffle House was hardly the only ridiculous, embarrassing display. I don't know if you caught any of the hearing for Pete Hegseth's nomination as Secretary of Defense earlier this week. I got to say, full disclosure, I have appeared on Fox and Friends several times. I have interacted with Pete Hegseth briefly. I don't know the man personally, but in every interaction I've ever had with him, he has been very professional. Seems like a nice guy, obviously a talented communicator. He is a decorated veteran. For that, we thank him for his service. But when I first heard his name floated for Secretary of Defense, I'm not going to lie, I was a little surprised. Didn't have that one on my bingo card. Don't think most people did. But the more I've learned about his background and the more I have heard him speak about that role and about his vision for the military, the more I'm actually very glad that Trump has kind of forced me to think outside the box on this one. Because if you look back at the last 4 years, right, we supposedly have a very qualified defense secretary right now, Lloyd Austin, at least on paper, who, again, you're not allowed to criticize anything that he does because he's a black man, right? So there's that. Here we go again. But Lloyd Austin, who is highly decorated, highly qualified, his resume is like 87 pages long, and we're supposed to think that that's fantastic. That's good enough. This is a man who, is very decorated and has a long history in the United States military, and that makes him very qualified. This is also a man, by the way, who has allowed mentally ill, gender-confused people to openly serve in the military, despite the fact that they have far higher rates of depression and anxiety and suicide and things that would disqualify other people from service. There are plenty of people with mental illnesses and emotional and psychological instability that we don't allow to serve openly in the military because we understand that that's a risk, but we're going to make an exception for trans identifying people because we have to make sure that we're inclusive. Military readiness be damned. Lloyd Austin also oversaw the botched Afghanistan withdrawal. He oversaw the ridiculous Gaza pier, you may recall, that cost hundreds of millions of dollars and 2 service members their lives, lasted like 2 weeks before it was dismantled. It was completely a bungled project from start to finish, a national embarrassment. We may have set all of that money on fire. And also, by the way, he didn't even bother to tell President Biden when he was going under for surgery. But he's super qualified. Super qualified. And he's also a black man, so he's infallible and completely above reproach, automatically fantastic, and you're not allowed to criticize him or you're a racist. I will tell you, if that is what qualified gets us, maybe a change agent like Pete Hegseth is exactly what we need. From reports I've seen, military recruitment is already up since Trump announced Hegseth as his nominee. Only time is going to tell whether that trend continues, whether we will once again restore our military readiness, confidence among our troops, a desire among young people to step up and support their country and serve because it's a country they believe in and worth supporting, and they have a commander-in-chief that they trust and respect. But none of that, which are legitimate issues, was on the table for Democrats this week, because they wanted to spend a lot more time trying to catch Pete Hegseth between a rock and a hard place with questions about his marriage and his sex life and his alleged drinking problem. I mean, Tim Kaine, who's a senator from Virginia, and as a native Virginian, I will say is an absolute embarrassment to the Commonwealth, and who frankly looks more like he would be more suited to chasing around Rocky and Bullwinkle than serving in the United States Senate. Tim Kaine absolutely embarrassed himself during the hearing earlier this week. He tried to bring up Pete Hegseth's former relationships. Here was that moment.
Completely cleared. Can you so casually cheat on a second wife and cheat on the mother of a child that had been born 2 months before, and you tell us you are completely cleared? How is that a complete clear?
Senator, her child's name is Gwendolyn Hope Hegseth, and she's a child of God, and she's 7 years old.
And she was, and you cheated on the mother of that child less than 2 months after that daughter was born, didn't you?
If you don't know, I'm sure most people do at this point, Pete Hegseth has been married now 3 times. He was admittedly unfaithful to his previous wife with the woman to whom he is now married. It's a whole big thing. It's his personal life. Frankly, has very little to do with his nomination for Secretary of Defense. Please do not get me wrong. I think character matters. And if it were up to me in a perfect world, I would say that every single person from the president down to his cabinet, down to every member of Congress should be a truthful, honorable American of unimpeachable character. But at this point, I think you might as well try to stock that pond with purple unicorns because true men and women of character seem to be in very short supply, particularly in this town. And see, the Democrats know that. And they know that that kind of nastiness exists within their own ranks as well. I mean, Tim Kaine is very close friends with Bill and Hillary Clinton, has been for years and years and years, actually defended Bill Clinton back in the 90s when he was caught having an affair with a White House intern while in office and then lying about it under oath. But now suddenly, Senator Kaine wants to pretend like cheating on your wife and being unfaithful to the promise you made in your marriage is somehow a disqualifier for service in the executive branch. Are you kidding me? All of a sudden you found your moral compass? Would you just misplace it for a while? Drop it under the couch? I'm going to leave it up to him whether he wants to be the pot or the kettle in this situation. Either way, looking pretty black. The current occupier of the Oval Office, President Joe Biden, his entire family spent years outright ignoring the existence of Hunter Biden's child, who he fathered with a stripper and then denied was his. It took a paternity test for him to acknowledge that he was, in fact, this little girl's dad. Even after that had been established beyond a shadow of a doubt, the entire Biden family refused to acknowledge that child, literally put up Christmas stockings for their entire family in the White House, and excluded her outright because they were embarrassed that she existed and didn't want to acknowledge her. This is the leader of Tim Kaine's party with whom he is friends and who he has defended, and now he wants to sit there and talk about child abandonment or turning your back on your family, implying that Pete Hegseth mistreated his daughter when he disrespected her mother. Nothing to say when the entire Biden family publicly shunned a child whose only crime was existing at their inconvenience. Kamala Harris, our current vice president, with whom Tim Kaine is friends and who he has defended and actively campaigned for, kicked off her political career by sleeping with a married man. That's not an allegation. It's not an open secret. It is an established fact. Kamala Harris's current husband, Doug Emhoff, admitted he knocked up his nanny while he was married to his first wife. The speculation is that she ended up having an abortion, which, if true, means that an innocent child lost its life in that situation because the adults in the room didn't want to take responsibility for their actions. Then a story broke that Emhoff smacked around his next girlfriend, and the left didn't give two craps about any of that. Tim Kaine was on Harris's campaign trail actively stumping for her in video, standing right next to Doug Emhoff. And now he wants to sit there in a congressional hearing and point fingers at Pete Hegseth and say, well, you cheated on your wife, and that disqualifies you for everything and generally makes you a scumbag. To which I would say cheating on your wife is absolutely a scumbag move, and like half the slime balls up there in D.C. are doing it. The political bubble in that town is well known for being a cesspool of vice and nastiness and perversion and corruption and all manner of garbage. The only difference between a sleazy strip club in Las Vegas in some back alley and Washington, D.C. is that the floors in Washington, D.C. are marble and cleaner. That's it. The behavior, not so much. Mazie Hirono, a senator from Hawaii, who might actually be one of the dumbest people in the United States Senate, where the bar for the intelligence quotient currently resides on the floor. Mazie Hirono spouted off about Pete Hegseth's supposed problem with drinking on the job, which, based on anonymous sources, has been refuted by just about everybody Hegseth has ever worked with, including his colleagues at Fox News. Dozens of people who have worked with him have come out and stamped their names on statements saying, they never saw him drunk on the job, refuting this claim made by anonymous sources. They're not aware of some alcohol problem he has. Nevertheless, Mazie Hirono basically accused Hegseth of being an alcoholic, suggesting he was incapable of serving as Secretary of Defense because he was a drunk, and if he's confirmed and he ever has a beer, he should resign from the job. Here's that moment.
Do you know that being drunk at work is prohibited for service members under the UCMJ?
Senator, those
Yes
are
or no?
multiple false anonymous reports peddled by NBC
Do you
News
know
that run
that
directly
drinking on the job
contradictory to
is
the dozens of men and women at
not
Fox News
contemplated on
Channel
it?
who I work with,
I'm not
who came
hearing
on
the
the
answer to my
record
question.
and said,
Will you resign as Secretary of Defense if you drink on the job, which is a 24/7 position?
I've made this commitment on behalf of
Will
the
you
men and women I'm
resign as
serving.
Secretary of Defense
I've
if
made this
you drink
commitment on
on the
behalf of
job?
the men and women I'm serving
I'm not
because it's the
hearing-
most important deployment
I'm not
of my
hearing an
life.
answer to my question, so I'm going to move on.
I'm not going to lie, this one is particularly hilarious to me given the fact that lawmakers are notorious for the amount of alcohol and other substances that they consume while in Congress. But even that aside, may I draw your attention to one Joe Biden, who is currently the president of the United States, who has been defended by the Democrat Party now for years, but who has been a brain-addled, pile of goo, completely incapable of doing his job now for pretty much his entire presidency, particularly these last few months. It's very obvious he doesn't know where he is, what he's doing at any given point in time. He actively falls asleep. He wanders off. He gets names wrong. He can't remember what he's there to do. He makes up stories. I mean, I know people who could be 3 sheets to the wind, and I'm not saying that's a good thing, but they're more coherent than Joe Biden is. It's been speculated that Kamala Harris has some sort of substance abuse problem. I'm not here to offer whether that's true or not. I will say that some of her appearances, some of the videos that her own team has put out on social media do leave the question pretty darn open as to whether she's on something. She slurs her words, her eyes appear very unfocused, the things that she says don't make a whole lot of sense. At the very least, there is a legitimate question and concern as to whether she's under the influence. Nobody's bothered to look into whether the Vice President of the United States may be drunk as a skunk. But here's Mazie Hirono just assuming that because some anonymous sources said it, Pete Hegseth, must be an alcoholic. That's hilarious to me, honestly. She screams at him to answer why he thinks getting drunk on the job is okay. He tells her he doesn't get drunk on the job, and then she accuses him of not answering the question because her question is based on a premise that he's actively denying. It's a question that in and of itself assumes something that he's saying isn't true, which means he can't possibly answer the question. To do so would be to accept the premise that he does in fact get drunk on the job, which he's saying he doesn't. And then she wants him to promise that if he ever has a margarita as Secretary of Defense, he's going to offer his resignation because he thinks he needs to be sharp as a tack at all times if he's going to be Secretary of Defense. Guess you're not getting any sleep. At the same time, the current president of the United States and the leader of her party, who she supports, is wandering around the White House drooling on his own shoes and doesn't know where he is. Sometimes, honestly, I wonder if these fools are ever introspective enough to go back to their office and think, dang, I just looked like a giant two-faced hypocrite there. They have to know it when the words are coming out of their mouths. This is such an obvious posturing. This is a clown show. I mean, you're sitting in the heart of vice and corruption, and everybody in the country with half a brain knows that, and you're going to point fingers at somebody for having a beer or being unfaithful in their marriage, which, as legitimately wrong as that may be, and I'm not trying to downplay that, but it has nothing at all to do with the job he's being asked to do, and it is certainly not an accusation that anybody in either party, frankly, has any right to condemn anyone else for. As far as I'm concerned, the ship has sailed on anybody in that town standing there wagging their finger in somebody's face about their moral failings. Or playing politics with when they decide that ethics and morality and character matter and when they don't. The left has completely scrapped the idea that professionalism and decorum and basic decency matter. This is the party that actively fights to put books with pornographic material in the hands of elementary school students and then accuses anybody who has a problem with that of being a Nazi book burner. This is the party that actively celebrates grown men parading naked in bondage gear through the streets in the middle of the summer at festivals that they then encourage you to take your children to. That actively fights to chemically castrate and physically mutilate healthy children in the name of their war on gender. They do not care if criminals loot and ransack people's homes or people's businesses. They want to continually let criminals loose on the street to assault and murder innocent people. This is the party that does not care when their president gets caught with an intern under the Oval Office desk. They do not care that the current vice president got her start having an affair with a married man. They do not care when it becomes painfully obvious that their president is mentally incapable of doing his job, even as they question whether somebody having a drink disqualifies them from a cabinet position because they were nominated by a Republican. If the left didn't have double standards, they would have no standards at all. And at least if there is one good thing to be grateful for in this mess, it is that at least for now, all of their posturing isn't gonna matter. And with that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you'll be back with me next Thursday. In the meantime, head over to Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show, and that way you won't ever miss an episode. Also, subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays with Tim Graham. You don't want to miss that one either. I'll see you guys back here next Thursday. We'll break it down even further. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. and a blessed week ahead.